Pastor Ishmael mentioned, I've been an intern this summer. It's been such a joy to be with you all. And so thank you also for giving me this space just to share a little bit about myself and my testimony. And I have a story to share of how God brought me from darkness to light. But I do just want to share with you, it's a little bit heavy. So if at any point in this time, like, it triggers something in you or something, I will not be offended if you need to step out. I will try to keep it as simple as possible, just so you can tell what the Lord has done in my life. But I just wanted to give that little warning, so that way no one was offended. Anyway, so my name is Sydney Thompson. I am from a Christian family. I have 4 siblings. I'm right smack in the middle. So I have an older brother, an older sister, a younger sister, younger brother. My siblings are all around here. But anyway, so throughout my life, I was actually homeschooled. And so my best friends were my church friends and my siblings. Those are who were in my life. I had such great friends. And then my parents ended up sending us to a private Christian school, and it was one of the best experiences for us. But through that, I was exposed to more people, and I had experienced more relationships and things that maybe weren't the best for me, and some were amazing. And so all of a sudden throughout my life that I had been pretty sheltered and had friends that my parents monitored and all the things, it was almost a shift where I was now able to allow who I wanted to have access to me. And through that, I just realized that my story had changed from this Christian home, this protected child, to a young teenager that was being sexually abused. And that was my story. And that is where I looked back at my life, and I'm like, how could I have got here? And so I just want to share a little bit about how I did get there. But what I want you to hear more than how that hard thing that happened in my life, I want you to hear more of what God did after that. And so, like I said, I was in this private Christian school. I was really struggling. I was 13. I was really struggling with health issues. I had horrible migraines. I would lose my eyesight. I couldn't even, I could hardly even talk, get up out of bed because it was so bad. So through that, I was missing a lot of school. And so the people who were in my life, or should be in my life, the God-honoring friends, were not around me as much because I was extremely isolated. And so through that isolation, there was one person that kind of had attached themselves to me. And it was grooming, it was manipulation, it was sexual abuse for 4 years of my life. And for 4 years of my life, my eyes were as dark as can be. I walked with my head to the ground. I wouldn't even make eye contact with people. My teachers would come to me like, we know this is not the Sydney we know. They had known me for years before. They're like, this is not the Sydney we know. What can we do to help you? And I was not honest. I just was not honest about what was happening to me because honestly, I didn't have a name to it. I didn't understand truly what was happening in my life. I just knew that I was at the lowest of lows, and I could not understand how this good God that my school was talking about, that my church was talking about, and that my family was talking about could allow something like this to happen to me. So fast forward a few years, I was just walking with my head down. I was in counseling a little bit for other things, but I was extremely isolated and vulnerable. I already had health issues, so I was isolated and vulnerable then. And then this person just came into my life when I was at the lowest, and I felt like this is going to be my best friend. This is the person who's going to save me. This is the person who's going to be the one that I need in my life for right now, because I had no one else. And little did I know that that was the very person that the enemy was going to use to bring me down to the bottom. And so I had got to, that was in 8th grade, so then I got to October of my junior year of high school, and I had been dealing with this for however many years, and I was like, I'm done. I'm going to call it what it is, and I'm done. I cannot handle this anymore. And I didn't know how. I had to keep going to school. I had to keep pushing through, and I just didn't know how I could get to a point where I could, one, admit to what was going on, and 2, get out of it. And so my options were, I was extremely suicidal. I had suicidal thoughts almost every single day of my life. I was like, the only way out of this is for me to not be here anymore. That was the only way that I could see, was for me to not be here anymore, because I could not figure out how to, 1, get this person out of my life, and 2, become a better version of myself I once knew. And so through that, it was just so dark of depression. I slept all the time. Like, I had no friends, honestly. I had no friends because I had isolated myself from everybody. Well, in October of my junior year, when I had decided this is done, this is over, I just told the Lord, I said, if you're a good God, and if you're the good God that you say you are, then things will turn around. Because I can't do this by myself. I don't know how. And so we had revival at our church that week, and my parents made me go. Normally I would have been all about it. I was not all about it. And so I went, I sat there numb as can be, wouldn't even look up at the preacher. And I heard him say, I didn't hardly hear anything in his sermon, but I heard him say, either you can be set free or Jesus is a liar. And in that moment, it was like, I almost got mad, because I was like, Jesus isn't a liar. But then it was like, I heard the Lord so clearly say, but what was the first part of that statement? You can be set free. And for the first time in 4 years, there was a different option. There was a different option than death. There was a different option than any of the other options that I thought that there were. I could be set free. How? I didn't know. But I just knew that I could be set free. And that night, I clearly heard the Lord say, you have to tell your parents that's how it's going to go. Like, that's how you're going to be set free. You have to tell your parents. And I audibly said to the Lord, no, I will not do that. If you want my parents to know, you will tell me. And this is the first time in a few years that I had consistently been talking to the Lord. I stopped talking to the Lord because, like I said before, I felt like a good God wouldn't be allowing this to happen. And so, through that, I went to bed that night. It was a Monday night. And in full hope that maybe the Lord would tell my parents. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I knew I wasn't going to. And so the next day, I'm working at the coffee shop I worked at, and my parents come in, and they get coffee, and they're sitting down just hanging out. And I had a little bit of a break, so I go sit at their table. And my mom looks at me and says, is this what's happening to you? And she named it, thing after thing after thing that I had been experiencing. And it was the first time, because my parents had asked me multiple times for the last 4 years what was going on. And I would lie, and I would lie, and I would lie, because I could not feel like I could even say that out loud. Like, it was like I was full of so much shame, and I felt so disgusting. Like, I could not even say that out loud. And it was the first time that I wasn't defensive, that I didn't say no, and I just wept before my parents. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. And so they instantly took action and got me out of that situation, so thank the Lord for my parents. But it was, after I had admitted to that, it was a long journey ahead of me of healing, and I didn't want to face it. I was like, I told my parents, well, the Lord told my parents, and I was like, but I saw, that was the first time I saw something that the Lord did for me. Like, it was like I had been pleading with him for 4 years, and finally something happened. And so I was like, okay, I have to face this head on, but how am I going to do this? I don't know. So I instantly went to counseling, back to counseling, and started in that. And then I instantly went to my high school principal, because he was the one that had questioned me for 4 years. And he, like, if it wasn't for the grace of God and him, Mr. Scott Clemens, I don't think that I would even be here today. He's the one who sat with me in school every day and allowed me to just feel all the feelings I had to feel, and just grieve and just admit to what was going on in my life. And so I went directly to him, and I just shared. I said, this is what I haven't been truthful with you about. And I mean, there was so much forgiveness on his end, because he's like, I understand. Like, it's hard to admit to what you've walked through. So all of a sudden it changed from this Christian family to my story was now sexual abuse. But then my story was now, how do I heal from this? I realized that there were things done to me, but I eventually had to decide what I was going to heal from, what I was going to face, what I was going to work through. I had to decide that for myself. And healing didn't mean for me that I had to pretend it didn't hurt, because it did. It was painful. It was horrible. But in that, Jesus met me in the darkest of places, and I realized that I cannot change what happened to me, but through Jesus, what happened to me doesn't get to decide what happens through me and through my life. And so I want to share a little bit about Jesus and his words in Hebrews 12:2. He says, "For it was the joy that was set before him that he endured the cross, despising the shame." It sticks out to me because he says that this painful thing was the joy that was set before him. He never said that the cross was going to be wonderful. He never said that the cross wasn't going to hurt and that it was going to be joyful. But he said that it was the joy that was set before him that he endured the cross. And so that just reminds me, like, my abuse, our stories in here, God didn't have to call them evil. Or God did not need to call evil good for him to restore it. Like, we can call it what it is. It's evil, it's horrible, it's awful. But that doesn't mean that God can't bring something good out of it. And so I realized through that he could redeem my story. And he was redeeming my story day after day. There was still a ministry in that. There was still a purpose for that pain. There was still freedom. And honestly, there's still a version of me who could stand in front of people and tell the story instead of being controlled by it. Because I was controlled by it. I lived victim of it for a very long time. And I finally recently felt it's time for you to share it, because it's what God did for you. And so I realized that the cross wasn't the joy. The joy was on the other side of the cross, what the cross was going to accomplish. And I realized that that's the same in my story. Sometimes faith is believing there's something on the other side when you can't see it all. All you can see is the pain of the cross. In Matthew 26:38, Jesus also says, "My soul is swallowed up in sorrow to the point of death." This is when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, begging God to take this cup from him. But then he also said that it was the joy that was set before him that he endured the cross. So in my time of walking through this, I'm like, how can those two coexist? How can they live in my same body, my mind, my heart? Like, I'm grieving so much of the life I thought I'd live, the school years, the teenage years I thought I'd live. But then I'm also seeing like this greater calling, this healing that's taken place in my life. I'm like, how can those coexist? And I realized that the same Jesus that said that it was the joy that was set before him also said that he was swallowed up in sorrow to the point of death. He was scared. He didn't want to do it, but he chose it for us. And so he grieved. Jesus grieved. Jesus cried. He was overwhelmed. He asked the Father if there was any other way that he could get out of this. And that's what I did for years. Is there any other way besides me admitting to what's going on that I could get out of this? And I kind of thought that if I were going to heal from this, then I wouldn't be allowed to hurt anymore. I thought that maybe if I started to heal, I couldn't grieve what I had lost. And I thought that if I trusted God enough, then I wouldn't need to grieve what happened to me. That if a good God could save me, then there wouldn't be any more grief. And I realized that our stories are the complete opposite of that. That joy of who God is and what he's done for us, and the grief of what we walked through, can walk right, straight, parallel together. You can have joy set before you and still grieve what is behind you. Faith and questions can exist in the very same prayer. Grief and joy can exist in the very same body, and healing and hurting can exist in the very same season. Because that was a season of my life where I was healing, but I was also hurting. And that was okay. And I realized that Jesus knew that the resurrection was coming, but he still wept in the garden. He knew exactly how this story was going to play out. But he still allowed himself to feel the pain that he was facing. And I think that that's a good reminder for all of us that you don't have to ignore your pain. Just because there might be something good out of it. Acknowledge that there's something good out of it, but still feel your pain. Shame does not belong to us. Shame isn't of God. Confusion isn't of God. And like I said before in my story, I walked with my head down for a lot of years. With my head to the floor, my eyes were dark. It was like people, actually my counselor said this to me because she's actually known me since I was born. So when she looked at me when I came into her office, she said, Sydney, I have never seen you look this way. It's like there's nothing behind your eyes. And that's what I faced for years. That it was just dark. I had no thoughts. Like it was like I couldn't even think straight. So I want to go back to Hebrews 12:2, where he says it was the joy that was set before him, despising the shame. Sexual abuse carries a particular kind of shame. It makes you feel like something about you is just dirty. It's damaged, and it's permanently changed. But the shame of what someone did to you or to me was never ours to carry. Jesus took that shame to the cross. And for a long time, I carried things that didn't belong to me. And I will admit that. I carried things that didn't. I carried the weight of somebody else's choices as if they were my own choices. I questioned my worth because of something someone else did. Shame made me lower my head. Shame tells you to not look at people in the eyes. Shame tells you to hide. Shame tells you to run away. And shame tells you that if people really knew your story, that they would look at you different. And that was so far from the truth. And when that was my mindset, is when I met God as the lifter of my head. In Psalm 3:3, it says, "But you, O Lord, are a shield around me, my glory and the lifter of my head." And that's what Jesus did for me and has done for me. And that's what he can do for you. He didn't just forgive me. He didn't just help me survive. He literally lifted my head. When shame has your head down, you spend your life looking at the ground. There's all this around me, but I saw no one. I saw only what was on the ground. I saw only what was in my head because I was looking straight to the ground at all times because I felt that if I looked at someone in the eyes, someone would know what was happening. Someone would know what was going on in my life because if I looked them in the eyes, they would see someone who they didn't know. So when you're looking at the ground, you see what happened. You see your mistakes. You see your scars. And you see what was taken. But when you allow God, like he talks about in Psalm 3:3, when you allow God to lift your head, to be the lifter of your head, suddenly you can see what's in front of you. And that is the joy that's set before you. When you can finally see what's in front of you. So I spent years looking down at what happened to me until Jesus put his hand, literally, I like to think about it like this because he literally put his hand under my chin and lifted my head. So I could see so I could see him. If I could just look to him. If I could just look at the cross. If I could just lay it all down at the foot of the cross. I had to lift my head. He says, look up. Look at me. Look at what I have ahead of you. And your story isn't over. So through healing through that, and through acknowledging Jesus as the lifter of my head, I had to decide where I was going to live. Was I going to live in the shame? Was I going to live in the grief? Or was I going to live in the wonder-working blood of Jesus? They already cover all that. And so that was the choice I had to make. Not whether the abuse happened, not whether it hurt or not whether I would ever grieve again or could allow myself to grieve, but whether I was going to spend the rest of my life living underneath the weight of what happened to me, or if I was going to choose to live underneath the blood of Jesus. And that's what I chose. Because I didn't want to live in the shame, in the guilt, the performance, the fear, the hiding, the what someone did to me. I chose to live in the blood. I chose to live in the blood that doesn't erase my story. It invites me to share it. It invites me to help it be a hand to somebody else, the lifter of somebody else's head. That's what it invites me to be. And it redeems it. And so after that, my story became a testimony. And that was just in this last year. I was going to college. I was actually in marketing and graphic design. And I had no intention of being in any sort of ministry. Until I finally got to a place in my healing that the Lord said, that's what you're called to do, is to share this story. That's what you're called to do, is to reach out to the broken people. Specifically the broken teenage girls that are hurting because this is the story that they're facing. And so in Genesis 50:20, Joseph looks at his brothers who had done so much harm to him and says, you planned to harm me, but God intended it for the good. He doesn't say that what happened was good. He calls it evil. That's what it was evil. What his brothers did to him was evil. What happened to you was evil. What happened to me was evil. But evil doesn't get the final word. And that was Joseph's testimony, and that was mine too. The evil doesn't have to have the final word. God is still good. God was still good in that season of my life. And what intended to destroy me is now something God can use, and I pray that God uses it to bring freedom to others. Because that's my goal, is in sharing this. It's not easy. It's not something I'm proud of. It's not something I wanted to walk through. But in sharing this, I pray that it can be the freedom that somebody else is seeking for. The enemy wanted my story to end in silence and shame, but God turned the very thing I thought I would have to hide forever into a testimony that I could bring to the light. And so that is what I will do for the rest of my days, is share the story of what God did for me. And I will never stop, because he's a good God. And so maybe your story isn't sexual abuse. Maybe it's rejection. Maybe it's grief. Maybe it's addiction that you just can't seem to get out of. Maybe it's something that you did. Or maybe it's something that somebody else did to you. Maybe you've spent years with your head down because you cannot stop looking at the worst chapter of your life. But I want you to remember that Psalm 3:3 says that he is the glory and the lifter of your head. And you can come from grief to glory. It was the first time that I was like, wait, I think I've been set free, was I was singing at my high school, my junior year, and I was singing the words, he is the glory and the lifter of my head. Great is his faithfulness. In grief and in glory, still great is his faithfulness. Those were the lyrics that I was singing. And my principal came up to me afterwards and he said, Sydney, your eyes are different. Like, you have light in your eyes. Like, his faithfulness is, like, he's a good God, and his faithfulness has saved you. And it was the first time where I was like, wait, I think I'm going to be okay. I think I'm going to get through this. And so, like I said, maybe your story isn't sexual abuse. Maybe it's whatever it may be. I would just invite you to look to Jesus. There is still joy set before you. And there still can be, even if you can't see that. Don't stop dreaming. Don't stop moving on. Don't stop healing. Continue to get the help that you need, because there can still be joy set before you. But still remember that you are allowed to grieve in the garden. You're allowed to grieve what you lost. You're allowed to grieve the years that you lost, the innocence, whatever it may be. You're allowed to grieve that. And you're allowed to acknowledge that the cross hurts. But please don't forget that resurrection is coming. Don't forget that the cross wasn't only hurt. Don't build your home at the cross, because there's more to it. Lift your head. There is more ahead of you than what happened behind you. What happened to me will always be a chapter in my story, but because of Jesus, it does not have to be the final page. He lifted my head, he took my shame, and he taught me that there was still joy set before me. Thank you so much for letting me share with you.